สวัสดีค่ะทุกท่านวันนี้นะคะขอยินดีต้อนรับเข้าสู่การบรรยายพิเศษนะคะซึ่งงานในวันนี้เนี่ยเป็นส่วนหนึ่งของบางกอกอาร์ต Biennale ปี 2024 ค่ะวันนี้ไหมรู้สึกเป็นเกียรติมากๆเลยค่ะที่ได้มาทำหน้าที่เป็น MC ให้กับการบรรยายในวันนี้ทางทีม Bangkok Art Biennale นะคะรู้สึกขอบคุณแล้วก็ตื่นเต้นมากๆที่วันนี้ทุกท่านได้สละเวลามาร่วมฟังทอล์กในวันนี้นะคะที่เรียกได้ว่าเป็นโอกาสที่หายากมากๆนะคะที่จะมีประติมากรระดับโลกนะคะอย่างคุณโทนี่แคร็กมามอบการบรรยายให้กับเรานะคะ Good afternoon everyone and welcome to today's special talk session as part of Bangkok Art Biennale 2024. My name is Mai and I am honored to be your MC today. We are thrilled to have you all here at this special and inspiring event featuring one of the most renowned sculptors of our time, Tony Cragg, whose work has just recently been installed at One Bangkok. ก่อนที่เราจะเริ่มนะคะหมายอยากจะเกิดให้ฟังหน่อยว่าวันนี้โปรแกรมจะเป็นยังไงบ้างก็คือเราจะมีการบรรยายนะคะจากคุณโทนี่แคร็กแล้วหลังจากนั้นเนี่ยก็จะมีเซสชั่นพูดคุยนะคะแล้วก็ตามด้วย Q&A session ที่ถ้าคนไหนมีคำถามก็สามารถที่จะถามกับคุณโทนี่ได้โดยตรงเลยค่ะก็ before we begin let me briefly share the flow of today's program first we will start with the talk from Tony Cragg and then we follow by discussion and Q&A session where you will have a chance to ask Tony Cragg himself directly anything about his work and his ideas. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce someone very special who has been playing such an important part in shaping the Bangkok Art Biennale since its day one back in 2018. He is an influential figure in the contemporary art world and is an artistic director and a curator of Bangkok Art Biennale. I think you know who I'm talking about. He's also a member of Art and Culture Development Committee at One Bangkok. He is a leading voice in promoting contemporary art not only in Thailand but also internationally. With a long and distinguished career as an art historian, art curator, and as a former permanent secretary for the Ministry of Culture here in Thailand. Now, everyone, please join me in welcoming Professor Dr. Aphinan Posayanon ค่ะ
สวัสดีครับในนามของมูลนิธิบางกอกอาร์ต Biennale แล้วก็วันแบงคอกนะครับขอบคุณทุกท่านเป็นอย่างยิ่งที่มาร่วมงานในวันนี้เวลาที่เราประกาศเนี่ยแป๊บเดียวจริงๆเพราะว่าศิลปินเพิ่งมาเมื่อวานนี้นะครับแล้วเราก็ประกาศในเวลาอันใกล้มากแล้วผมก็ดีใจมากที่ห้องนี้เต็มนะครับบ่งบอกให้เห็นถึงความสนใจกับวงการศิลปะในบ้านเราบางกอกอาร์ต Biennale 2024จะเริ่มในวันที่ 24 นี้นะครับเราจะมีไปจนถึงวันที่ 25 กุมภาพันธ์ปีหน้าแต่ก่อนหน้าที่จะเปิดเป็นทางการเราก็จะมี soft opening ในวันนี้นะครับบุคคลที่จะมาพูดวันนี้เนี่ยผมคิดว่าเป็นศิลปินระดับโลกที่ถ้าเบื่อคนอยู่ในวงการศิลปะจะต้องรู้ว่าท่านผู้นี้เนี่ยสำคัญอย่างมหาศาลนะแล้ว ท่านผู้นี้ก็มาอยู่กับเราแล้วไม่รู้จะว่าไงนะครับว่างานของท่านเนี่ยติดตั้งที่วันแบงคอกแล้วเนี่ยเมื่อวานนี้ไปเห็นแล้วมันสุดยอดสะเทือนใจมากแล้วผมคิดว่าทุกท่านก็จะแชร์ความรู้สึกนี้เหมือนกับผมเวลาไปดูของจริงนะครับก็ดีใจมากๆ so distinguished guests ladies and gentlemen I'm so delighted that with such short notice this is full house and Tony Cragg will be giving a talk, special talk for us. And I'm sure it's going to be an amazing experience. Many of you know that Tony Cragg is such a seminal, world-renowned artist who has contributed so much worldwide and has collections and experience, participated in many, many world-renowned events. Because he's here today, I think it's a great opportunity for us to hear him live and to get this experience. I think it's like so rare, so once in a lifetime. And I hope very much that you will enjoy, appreciate Tony, who will be leaving tomorrow, and I'm sure he'll come back soon. But anyway, take this opportunity today and nourish it and nurture it. Thank you. Please.
Okay, I think now it's time. So please join me to welcoming Tony Cragg, everyone, our distinguished speaker today.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So it's a bit of a surprise to be here, but it's a pleasure, and especially in your company, Anne. It's today's been a very adventurous day because we've been installing the sculpture in Bangkok 1. So we've had quite an interesting time. I think to give a talk in a place that I've never been before is a bit of a challenge. And so I think I'm going to be very prompt and just do something which is a little bit sort of biographical, to maybe say who I am, why I do what I do, and what I do. I was born in England in 1949, in Liverpool, and I never grew up there. And my grandfather was a farmer in the south of England, and my father, shortly after the Second World War, was, I think, delighted that he didn't want to work on the farm, so he became an engineer that designed parts of aircraft, electrical parts, components of aircraft. And this was very influential on my life, just simply because in Britain there were several projects over a long period of time. So we moved continually from one aircraft project to the other. I went to 7 schools, from the very north of Scotland to the very south and the west of Britain, all because this is where they made aeroplanes. And when you change school a lot, I think one of the things you can always follow certain subjects at school, mathematics, physics, they don't change too much. It's slightly more difficult learning languages in different places, or history, or other subjects. So I think I grew up more or less in my father's way of thinking about things, and I assumed that art, science and technology would be everything. There was no skepticism in those days about art, the possibilities of art and science, of science and technology. And I was quite interested in, as a small child, fascinated, in fact, in geology and in other things like that. So when I left school, I had the opportunity to work as a laboratory assistant in the years 1968-69, just putting the experiments together and building up the experiments, but also mixing the chemicals and everything that involved with that. And it was a strange place to work You're all too young to remember, but 1968-69 was a very exciting time in Europe and in other parts of the world. Love was in the air. There was a lot of talk about peace, and there was a lot of fantastic rock music. So it was a really amazing and exciting time to be a teenager. And I was working in a very smelly laboratory with there were no girls there, and it was a lot of old men. And and it wasn't the old men that were smelly; it was the chemicals. So the work I had, it involved me spending a long time taking notes, making results. There weren't computers then to do the job, so I had to write down all the results. It took ages, took my evenings and my weekends away. And in that period of time, I started, with pure boredom, I started to draw. And which is something I found totally fascinating. I didn't know anything about art, which I think, even today, I think has been a great advantage. And I very slowly, after a while, I had a girlfriend, and she suggested, oh, the drawings are not that bad. Maybe you could do something else for 1 year, go to an art school or something. A completely new idea. And I went to an art school. I applied and then got in, and I spent a fantastic year in the west of England in a wonderful situation. And for the first time, I met people that were interested in art, artists and teachers of art. And I started to think about these things. And I just really wanted to draw and to paint. And then a little bit later, as the progress went on, I started to, at one point in the middle of the year, we were told, oh, next week you're going to make a sculpture. And I thought that was a terrible idea. I couldn't imagine what the point of that would be. So I rather unwillingly started to make a sculpture on a Monday morning. And if there was a really catharsis in my life, I think it was that moment, because suddenly what I'd found in the drawing, that when you put these very simple materials together and you move and your brain is working, you suddenly produce images and ideas and imaginations and emotions just out of moving the material around. And this was the moment I realized that not just doing it in 2 dimensions, but doing it in 3 dimensions is a really ecstatic experience. Suddenly to change the volume of something, to change the silhouette of something, to change the texture of something, and all of the time you're in a relationship and the ideas are flowing instantly and quickly through your body, your mind and your emotion. And it's a real, if you like, it's a real trip in some ways. Very, very exciting. And I have to say, that was 55 years ago, and I'm still doing it. So that is what has really occupied me in my life. And in an art school, we used to have this situation where you have critical situations, you make something and somebody comes and talks about what you've made. I think it's probably like that nowadays. Well, so somebody came and they looked at my work. I didn't think of it as a sculpture. I just thought the idea was, what can I do with material? That's really, I didn't know what sculpture was, I had no idea. But when this critical situation and this person said, well, this is arte povera. Arte povera. I had no idea what arte povera was. So I rushed off to the library to find out what arte povera was, and suddenly I discovered, minimalism, arte povera, land art, happenings, events, everything, a flow, an enormous flow of things that were happening at that time in the late 60s and early 70s. And then even in Britain, I realized, we had a tradition, even as a schoolboy and an ignorant person about art, you couldn't avoid hearing about Henry Moore and Barbara Hepworth. And then, so I knew of this character. And then there was a generation of artists after that. It was Anthony Caro and Philip King, and it was mainly men that welded metals together to make sculptures kind of constructive works, if you liked. And by 68, 69, there was already a third generation of artists in Britain making work. And this is Gilbert and George and Richard Long and Barry Flanagan. And so suddenly, in my view, I was 20 years old and there were already 3 generations of sculptors making work. And quite honestly, I'm not going to say in conflict with each other, but the debates and discussions that went around the work were really with a lot of energy, and sometimes sculptors being sculptors, a little bit of violence as well. So I realized that sculpture was not just about making interesting things in the world or making things look better. It had really serious issues. So the discourse and the debate about the work was very, very energetic. And once you started to take in all of the other things that were happening in the world, you realized the richness and the fullness of the possibilities of making things. This was an enormous disappointment to my father. When I told him, oh, I'm making sculpture, he just said, what a waste of time. And so that was, and I think it was exactly the encouragement I needed, so I started to get involved and find out exactly what happened. And I suddenly realized in a certain point of time, and we're in 50 years later, so things have changed considerably in that period of time. The art world in the last 50 years has become immense. In Britain, in the late 60s, there were 6 galleries showing contemporary art, small galleries, very small, like living room situations virtually. And when we went to the openings, there were more or less the same 50 or 100 people coming along to the exhibitions. So it was a very small world. We talked about the world becoming more influenced by art, and we didn't know how that would function, but we did talk about it. And suddenly one realized there was a real possibility to actually change the shape of the world, to change people's minds, to influence people's lives by making art. And that's where we are now. But the way it started, I knew nothing about art history at the beginning of my education. But what happened is that I realized, obviously in Europe, I have to pick my reference as Europe, obviously, in Asia in a different way. In Europe, all sculpture had been figurative up to the 19th century. It had all been about the human figure. Even if it was made of animals, they were metaphors for some human condition. And so it was an interesting thing to see what happened. The academies in Europe in the 19th century, they dictated the look of the sculpture. So it was very stylized. And that's why even today, academicism has a bad reputation, because it was a very corrupt system of doing things. And it was left in the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, to very few sculptors to change that situation. And they were all very, very different people. One of them was obviously Mayol, who started to still work with the figure, but he made a kind of composition of geometric forms out of things. He didn't worry about the eyebrows and the details of the fingers. He presented the figure as a kind of more stoic and a volumetric form. Then there was obviously Rodin, and Rodin was a fantastic character because for the first time he wasn't worried about the anatomy, representing the anatomy in a precise way, getting all the muscles and the bones were in the right position. He wanted to have an emotional effect in the work. So he would make the sculpture. He even let other people make the sculpture. Then he would bend it, break it, drop it on the floor, do perverse things to it, just to make it have an emotional character. And his thing then was he was obsessed with Freud. So it was the psychological effect of the material that interested him. And that was a very, very significant moment for art in general, that people realized it's not just about ideas or ideals. It was about emotionality, about expressiveness. So there's so sculpture suddenly breaks out of its traditional function of being for powerful people, the church, the monarchy, the government, and people of power and wealth. It was about something else. It was about representing, it was humanity in its form, in all of its different facets. And so after that, obviously it goes very quickly after that. Obviously then there's Brancusi coming into Paris, bringing the ideas of the Byzantine, from Romania, bringing the Byzantine tradition of making wooden sculptures into that situation, and then a form of geometricizing the sculpture, and this became a brand new world in a sense. And suddenly, so there's lots of things going on. I mean, there was Tatlin making work out of steel sheets of metal, of building his tower, and a sort of figurative, no figure, just a constructive pile of material, if you like. And incredibly important was Duchamp. And Marcel Duchamp was the artist that, in a way, I mean, people say that Picasso was the major influence of art in the beginning of in the first half of the 20th century, but Duchamp was definitely the biggest influence in the second half of the 20th century, and we're still living, in a sense, in the backwater of a lot of the consequences of his work. The consequences of the work are fundamental. The first thing is that he just wanted to annoy the bourgeois French by offering a pissoir as a sculpture. And it was maybe just a sort of a naughty gesture. But the consequence of it was very interesting, because what it did is suddenly made people realize that everything, even a pissoir, or a bar of soap, or a chair, or a glass, or a carpet, everything has a meaning to us. It's not just the things we make in a special category of things called sculpture, but it made us realize that we are in a constant dialogue with materials. The material world is influencing us permanently. Not just one thing, but sitting where you are now, 1,000 things are talking to you. The air pressure, the colors, the crazy man standing in front of you, the seat you're sitting on, everything. The whole thing is, and that is what we're doing. We live in a matrix of material, and we respond, our body, the shape of our body, everything about us is a consequence of this dialogue, evolutionarily, but also in the sense that we're living today, is a consequence of this dialogue with the material. And suddenly you realize this is what sculpture is about. It's about the material world. It's about how it affects us, how it changes our ideas, how it affects our emotions. And that's all I'm doing. What I discovered as a relatively young person, making my drawings, just trying, I never tried to draw something. I do sometimes, but it's not really so interesting. It's a vain attempt, or modeling a person. I mean, nature's made people. Why do I have to make people? There's a lot of things that haven't been made, and that's what I've been trying to do, is to make the things that don't exist. We see the things that nature makes, we see the things that industry make. And I don't want to make that. That's made already. But what Duchamp did, he showed us that everything in the world has an effect on us. And what it did, it opened up the whole material world for artists to work in. So the consequence of that event is that artists in the 20th century went through the world and discovered new things, new objects, and new materials to make art with. And it was the most thing. So after the Second World War, where carving was, there was traditional sculptors and very good artists as well. Suddenly, a lot of the art movements, arte povera, where I started, arte povera, pop art, fluxus, land art, events, many of those things, the basis of that is that one takes things out of the real world, changes the context of them, or changes the terms around them, and that is the way in which these things are functioned. So the consequence is that the whole of the material world has become open for artists to work with. And we live in that time now. There's no question of, artists, all the materials you can possibly use to make work with. The other consequence is that Duchamp, he related the object to language and thought. And that's a very important moment. The idea that a thing exists in space, a microphone. It has a three-dimensional extension, but associated to that, it already has a name, microphone. And it has a shape. It has something you can see, and a color, and a weight. It has all of these attributes of a material object. So it's the same with everything. Everything has, but it's around the object. You know, if you take a simple glass, and you have a glass, that's a simple object. But there's a technology about the glass. There's a mythology of the glass. There are stories, there's a poesy, there's a history of art. So that means around the glass, there's an enormous cloud of meaning. Some of it just technical information, but some of it even poetic in a way. So in a way, even when I can't see the glass exists in my mind. The idea, you all have glasses in your mind, you know? So those are the terms. So you realize that around an object, there are lots of terms associated. And the basis of the ready-made is simply that the artist realized that it's a strategy. You can take an object and you can manipulate the terms around that object. So you can even make a soup can into a sexy object. You can change everything. A rabbit's foot is it's no longer just a rabbit's foot. It becomes a symbol of something, something. And we know that because that's what we have in our whole existence. There's nothing we can't think about that and even talk about. And for that, we need terminology. And so that was a very, very important part. So I was a young person at that time with Artie Porver and all these things going on. And I was completely absorbed by it. I wasn't so excited by the work of the carving aspect of making sculpture. I wasn't really, I was totally unprepared to weld metal together. It was much too masculine and much like hard work. But I was very happy as a poor student to find materials, to take part in that exploration, finding new materials and whatever. And so I had an opportunity to work in the Royal College in London. And so for that, I got a lot of materials together, and I made my first works, piling things together, making assemblages, making arrangements of materials. And very slowly, after that, one of the materials that I loved very much was plastic. It was a very fantastic material. I collected a lot of it and made large wall reliefs out of that and other works. It was all very gentle, low-level, just looking at things. It wasn't very spectacular work, but it was, for me, a very exciting and important thing to do. And after a while, a few years later, I even for the first time was in a position to make exhibitions. And I got into a kind of situation where I could make my works, going places, finding them. I had no ideas, bad idea. Ideas are a tricky thing for art. There's a lot of very good ideas that make terrible art. And sometimes there are some really wonderful artworks that don't have a very good idea at the back of them, like the Traviata or religious art or whatever things. So I'm not so keen on having ideas, but having the experience with the material interests me a great deal. So at a certain point, I had an opportunity for several years in the late 70s, early 80s to travel, make my work in different places, in museums, in galleries, in churches, in telephone boxes, all over the place. And it became a kind of repertoire of making. And this repertoire of making stuff became a kind of suspicious thing to me because it wasn't exactly what I intended to do, just to start making stuff and relying on it. And I had a kind of, in 1982, I had for me, a very important experience. I was in a situation where I had to make and I was looking at all the material I collected, and I realized if I had more time, I could make something more interesting out of it, but I would have to make it. Because just using the stuff that exists is one thing, but what I really needed to do is I needed to change the thing and make the stuff myself. So for the first time, since a long time, since my studies, I took several bottles, and they were in fact plastic bottles. And I endeavored to make the shadow of those bottles. And then I took the bottles away, and it was just in black wax, the shadows of the bottles. It was a terrible sculpture, but it really started me working with material, and I found that it was exactly the same. To do that was exactly the same idea as it was to actually do my drawing and whatever else. And that's really how I started to make more, in a sense, more concrete sculptures. Our lives is governed to the great extent, and we live in these wonderful rooms, and being very impressed with all the stuff that you're doing here in Bangkok, a very industrious and obviously very, very vital culture. And our lives, again, to a great extent, we're governed by what happens in science. And science is really the thing that tells us about the big principles of the reality we live in. It tells us about the universe, about what it is to be an organic being. But at the same time, I have to say, science is meaningless without art. Science tells us about the big principles of reality. But art tells you what it means. It tells you what the value of those things are. You know, I can say to somebody, look, in an average body there are 3 trillion cells in the body. Yes, fantastic. But emotionally, nobody cried, nobody was astounded. It's just an amazing fact that the universe is endless. That a whole reality, with the reality that we've experienced, scientists tell us that everything we see and everything that we are is the result of an aberration of the quantum at the very beginning of the universe. I mean, wow, we should just faint with kind of this information, but we don't. But if you tell somebody, every cell in your body is more complicated than the whole of Bangkok. Then you start to realize the complexity of our own being, the astounding astonishment of being here, of existing, the incredible thing. So I'm not a religious person. I don't trust religion. But I can understand people needing religion, because you have to. The sense of wonderment and astonishment of our own existence is just simply overwhelming. It is simply something that we really can't grasp. And I think the thing is that art actually tells us, it deals with these dimensions. It doesn't explain the world, but explains what it is to be a human being in this reality that we're surrounded with and with that we are a part of. Material, I always say I'm a materialist. And a materialist is, in a sense, in many ways, it's a dirty word for theologians and for some philosophers. But the fact of the matter is the material is the most amazing, complex and sublime things. I love to read these science books that I can't understand, because after a while they totally lose you. When they get into the 10 dimensions of the M theory, it's just too much that there is no time, that time doesn't exist. That's because in quantum physics there's no time. Well, it loses us, really. We can't, unless we're brilliant mathematicians. You have to be Mr. Hawkins and Mr. Carlson and everybody else, these fantastic scientists that work that out for us. But at the same time, we still have a sense of wonderment at our own existence. When I was making the plastic things, I realized two realizations. The way I used it was very simple. First of all, the obvious thing about plastic things made in industry is that they were colorful. And so I arranged things and used that color to make the work. But then what interested me greatly is that they weren't just colorful, but also, even in a big pile of industrially made objects, they were amazingly similar. The same geometries, a lot of circles, a lot of flat objects, a lot of straight edges, a lot of thin material. And it's really got me thinking about the way we make things, the limits of what we make. So our industry and our industrial systems use geometries, very simple geometries, to make our existence. So we look at the room, flat, 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 straight, 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 90 degrees, 90 degrees. Look at a table, average table, flat surface, straight edges, lots of modified cylinders on it. It's just simple. Walk through the town, walk through the city, another facade, another perpendicular, another quadratic thing, another thing. The same door latch, the same window, the same materials everywhere you go. So the things that our industry produce is incredibly simple because it has to be easy and economic to do it. But the fact of the matter is, our industrial systems cause our world to be impoverished in form. The possibilities of form are endless, are absolutely endless. If you have a block of clay, 10 kilogram of clay, inside that block of clay, there's endless forms, billions of different forms inside of that block of clay. Some of it's just dust on your fingers. Some of it is things you may recognize. But when you're working with the clay, in the same way when you're working with a piece of cellulose and some graphite to draw something, when you move the material around, you can actually experience these things. You suddenly make things that have your mind starts to generate more energy. Your emotions start to work in a stronger way. And you realize that things have a significance. They have a symbolic meaning. Symbolic, Greek, is for pulling things together, pulling the objects and ideas together. Very different from the opposite of symbolic is diabolic. Is to everything flies away in a different thing, and we see that as very devilish, as something even evil. So making things in a way is a matter of just looking at the material and experiencing the material and making the things that come out of it. And the reality of it is, between nature that has this fantastic variety of form and this repetitive dumbness of the world we're making today, sculpture is a cutting-edge use of material. Sculpture is one of the rare uses of materials to make objects that aren't utilitarian. You know, I don't make things you can sit on or eat off or whatever. They're just to be thought about for the experience of making. So I don't make things that are half utilitarian. It doesn't really interest me to do that. And I think that in that way that this gives sculpture a really, as I say, it really is the cutting edge of material development. Because every new form produces new ideas. And it produces new emotions. And it produces new terminologies, new terms, new thoughts. And with this we get new freedoms and we have more richness of life. And so, and so this is really what I think in a way is the importance, So very far, my father was so disappointed. He said, what a useless activity. And I'm telling you, sculpture, without sculpture, and it's very important in our lives today, where the world is really being impoverished with the form. We're slowly becoming an overpopulated planet, And so suddenly, you have to, if we don't be careful, we take all of nature's resources and crystallize it into dumb, meaningless geometries, And that is a really serious proposition. And the only way to actually work against that is with art. Yeah? And there may be a sense, yes, art, And if you really have a concern, because we live in a situation nowadays where people are concerned sometimes about the form of it, but they want to get their message across. So we have a lot of politically correct art going on. So we have, give women more chances, don't be mean to children, invite the environment. Well, just in case you think that's an invention of the last 10, 15 years, artists of the 50s had exactly the same concern. Joseph Beuys' Arte Povera was about changing the relationship of human beings to the natural world. Beuys and many other things, they were already philosophically dealing with the constructors. People like David Hockney were making paintings about sexuality, about different forms of sexuality. So artists, even in the 50s and 60s, were already working on these themes. Political correctness is something else, because it tends to sort of, the problem with art nowadays, and to some extent, it becomes like a political message, a social message. And it's a short abbreviation, which is not more interesting than a CNN television report about anything. It makes everything into a kind of, codifies everything very, very quickly. Into a kind of, in a sense, it's also a sense of crystallization, of stasis, and where there is stasis, this is death. In the 60s and 70s, the one thing we all disliked as young people was normality. We'd talk about normal Norman would be the last person we wanted to be. I don't know if you've ever listened to Frank Zappa with his T-shirt with Normal Norman, the most despicable person that he could imagine. And so we're in this conversation with materials, and we can never underestimate the vitality of that relationship, because there are certain things. With a tiny little bit of material, you can change so many things. I mean, if I stick my tongue out at you, this is a very little bit of material, but you're all smiling and thinking he's stupid, you know. But this is just because, and it's a tiny bit of material, but it changes what's happening in your mind. So the material is changing your mind. You think sometimes we're changing the material. No, it's the other way around. The material is changing our mind. And so that is what I think the strength and the wonder of actually the preoccupation with art. And if you want to change people's lives, if you really want to have an influence on people's lives, consider if people are interested in music, they have a richness in their lives, you know? They have something that's always with them. They can sing in the shower. They can be musical in their own hearts. If you teach people to look at the world and out of their observations of the world to create imaginations and thoughts and desires, this gives you dimensions and dimensions of meaning into everybody's lives. So many. The wonder of being here, the unlikeliness of being an intelligent, reflective intellect in this enormous universe. We cannot imagine how unlikely it is. And even the universe doesn't exist if we're not here. You know, people ask me, what is your favorite material? There is only one material. The human neuron, the human brain. In the hierarchy of materials, from the dust, from the molecules, from the primary particles, to the molecules, to the thinking molecules, to the living molecules, organic molecules, all of those things, the highest point so far, the most complex structure known to us is the human brain. And out of this brain, we make perceptions and thoughts. And we're learning about the most incredible things, the origins of our universe, and even speculating about where it will go. It's in that way that we realize what a fantastic opening and what the possibility of it. So when you're dealing with anything, when you're making things in the world, this is really what you're doing. You have an enormous responsibility to actually take those things on board in your art. It really changes the society. We cannot leave the shape of the future just down to politicians and businessmen. Politicians, you know, it's a great, you know, we live at a time and you wonder, who the hell is running this planet? You know, the Putins and the Trumps and the Erdogans and all of these crazy people. How on hell why are these people running the planet? All of these people are only interested in self-interest and self-power. The only leaders we should actually have are people that is interested in the well-being of everybody. That is the problem, not nationalists, not based on religion or belief or how you look or sexuality. That is the main thing. And I think art has made an enormous contribution to the understandings of these things. So I think art is something for the future, become more important in the future, and I think we should cherish that. And I think after that, I said I'd talk for 45 minutes, and that's it.
Well, thank you so much, Tony Cragg, for a truly inspiring and insightful talk. It's truly an honor for us to have you share your story with us today. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Apinan back on stage for a discussion session. And after this session, there will be a Q&A session where you will get to ask. Welcome back, ค่ะอาจารย์อภินันท์ No.
Wow, that was amazing, mesmerizing. Thank you so much, Tony.
Pleasure.
Are you gonna go into politics?
Well, you know, there is a tendency nowadays to think that art should have a political message. But for me, art is political. It's not impossible. We know what the rest of the world is making. So even to be occupied with art is already a political statement.
True. You being here, I think, has created many ripple effects, even before your arrival. The buzz that Tony Cragg is coming to create an amazing work in Bangkok, One Bangkok. This buzz has been going on for a long time, but today you're here and you've given a very, very powerful talk. Your talk is also an artistic comment in terms of your movement, your rhetoric, your expression. I think it also reflects your work, which is at One Bangkok. I just want to ask you to explain a little bit more in terms of you work all over the world, and you come here, I think, for the first time to Thailand.
Yeah.
Just briefly to comment that, for example, you have a sculpture park, and many of your works are placed in nature. In this context, in this particular work, it's not placed in the forest, but it's placed in a kind of another forest. So can you explain a little bit more of your experience of this work?
You mean specifically now for Bangkok?
Yeah.
I mean, but to be honest, I mean, perhaps to the contrary of how I started to make my work when I started to make exhibitions, the very last thing I'm really interested in is where the work will go to be honest. It's an irritation to know what other people want. As soon as people come to the studio and they say, yes, it's an interesting sculpture, but we have blue curtains, and I think, oh my God, I can't help these people. So anyway, and if they should make their own sculptures. But this is a particular sort of situation. I mean, it's a very special situation. It's a very dynamic situation. I know that people are trying to create a new dynamic and whatever, and the work itself, it isn't, starts in the studio as drawings 10 years ago. It was a result of then some smaller sculptures I made that developed very slowly over a period of time. I think the idea is very, very simple. It goes back to what I've just been talking about. Are we really here? Is it all just an illusion? It is, it isn't. I mean, our idea of reality is bound to be wrong. Since I'm a little boy, I have the sense that what we see in the world is only the top of the iceberg, that there's enormous reality that's hidden to us. And the whole history of human history just substantiates that fact that we never, our grandparents didn't know about the technologies we know today. They didn't know about viruses, they didn't know about many electrical things, they didn't know about the expanding universe. Maybe it wouldn't change their mind too much, their lives too much, but it has changed ours. So I think the idea of what we see is only the top of things. And I should say that when you make something, you can't be satisfied with whatever industry produces for us. We have to make the other things. There's a very simple way of putting it. I have said it before. We have names for things: bottle, glass. So these are discrete things with discrete terms around them, names. But the thing in between here, what does that look like? And that was the basis of some of my work. It was to make the thing in between. And I always say, you have to think about it in a kind of zoological way. The same thing. This is a pig, and this is an elephant. So two different things with different names. We know what you do with the pig, and we know what we do with the elephant. But if you're sitting in the park or walking down the pavement today, and you meet the piggyphant, this is where you would be horrified, because it'd be a new thing, a radical new thing, that may have existed sometime in the past, that may exist sometime in the future, but we have no terms for it, we have no experience with it, and would horrify us. And so, whether it's very small or very, very big, it would be a horrible experience to find a piggyphant. And so, that is really, but in a funny way, this is what artists are doing. We're looking for not what's there, we know what's there already. We're looking for the piggyphant. We're looking for all of the richness of the environment. So, this is very limited. There is only a glass and things, and there may be only like 500,000 different animals in the world, but the possibilities of materials is billions, maybe even endless. And so it isn't is really dealing for me with that backwards and uncertainty and feeling of I'm only getting a very little bit of the picture.
Piggyphant. Tony, have you heard of หมูเด้ง?
Sorry?
See, you say sorry.
Hear about what?
หมูเด้ง is a new creature. It's a new invention of a piggyphant. But anyway, coming back to Duchamp, to Beuys, to Hockney, Arte Povera, you eloquently talk about the history of art or history of contemporary art that you experienced since the late 60s or 70s. And you rightly mentioned that even in those days, all kinds of politics or equality have been explored by the artists. You think it's a cycle whereby now we're going through yet another phase of this kind of artistic expression, but then we have to face new forms. You talk about technology, you talk about now we have to face AI, something beyond us.
Maybe not. No. Yeah, I know you're right, but the thing is this, that the art world that I've known in the last 55 years has changed beyond recognition. I started by saying, those very small galleries and whatever. And nowadays you have museums in Bangkok, you have museums and biennales, and in every country in the world, South America, Africa, everywhere. So art is really expanding and influencing people, more than religion, more than many other things. It's really a growing concern. And we've had developments. For example, I talked about the ready-made. The problem that we have is that the ready-made, there are only so many things in the world. It's an infinite number of things. So after the artists get to the last thing that they can bring into the art world and change the context, there's also the necessity to do something else. I think it's an artist like Damien Hirst was a very challenging artist because he brought in zoology, dead animals and plants into the art world, and it was about conservation, presentation, preservation. About this. So, and all of these artists, and I think the fantastic thing about art is this. Obviously, I'm an individual with my own desires and things, but art is not made by one person. Art is made by thousands and thousands of people making things. Art is a movement in the world. It relies on individual points of view, but it's a movement in the world. So everybody contributing, everybody making things is already something that's developed. And that's a transition that is, I mean, you can be critical about it. I mean, look at it and you think, I don't like it, I don't want it, but it's not the proper opportunity, because the world is being changed by these things. And it's also an evolutionary thing, because the amount of stuff that's being made, some things remain relevant and some things pass away. And that's, I think, a very natural thing. So there is a natural and I think very vital dynamic to the development of art, even at this point.
Now, early in your career, you collect
I had a
materials.
career.
You have a long career, long successful career. Okay. But anyway, you collect things. You collect perishable. You collect objects, and you put them together as installations. But the materials you use change. You think because those days you were maybe impacted by arte povera or experimentation. But nowadays, you use more solid, monumental sculptures. Please, can you just compare the two?
Yeah, I think I kind of experience I had when I was a small boy. I said at the beginning of the talk that I've moved a lot as a child. My father was moving. And so one day, we were moved to a place just north of London. And there were no roads, there were no pavements, and there were no fences to make the garden. And but nearby there was some gravel, some loose. So my father said to me and my younger brother, we were maybe 7 or 8, something like that, very young. And he said, you know, collect some gravel and make a path for the. We said, yes, fine. So we had some buckets and we collected this gravel, and my brother, he emptied his bucket, and as he did this a fantastic stone came out of the thing, and we both grabbed it. He got it first, but because I'm his older brother, I took it off him to look after it. I still have it next to my bed, and we thought somebody had dropped a very valuable object in this place. So we didn't want to tell anybody about it. But before going to bed, my father, we asked him, what is this? And he looked at it, he said, wow, that is an echinoid. It's a fossilized sea urchin. And it was so beautiful and so perfect. And we said, what's an echinoid, Dad? And he said, yes, well, you see, this used to be the ocean here, you know, with very different animals living in it, you know? And then the land came up, and then after that, there was an ice age. And the ice age pushed all the stones down to where we're living, and we're living on an end moraine. And this is the gravel. We were only little boys, but suddenly, a prehistoric ocean here? Oh, 3 kilometers of ice on top of us? An object, a simple object, opened up a worlds of meaning to us. You know, fantasies and the ideas that never could possibly leave us. And this is really what you can do with everything. There's a way of changing all things, of giving new materials, of finding new things. So you're finding things is always important. Seeing things, finding is only a form of active observation, if you like. The materials I use today, because of the work that I make, I use man-made materials. The material I'm interested in, I can't cut up trees. It's terrible. I would think it'd be like dealing with a dead body. But I use plywood because it's constructive material. or I use cement, or I use bronze, or I use stainless steel. These are not, you don't find any of these in nature. The only thing which is an exception that is I use is stone. And stone, when I get it, is a 2.50 meters long, 1.50 meters wide, and 1.20 high. It's a Euro block. It doesn't look like a mountain or a cliff or something out of nature. It's already been rationalized. So what I'm trying to do is, with the materials that we build our normal reality with, I want to build something else, the alternative to the constructions, to the crystallized, repetitive world we're building.
Now, talking about material, especially this piece, because it's stainless steel and it's placed outdoors, and the climate make the work changes constantly, from dawn to dusk, even the silhouettes, the nuances, the colors. But in terms of heat, does it, during the day?
Yes, okay. Well, I mean, of course. I mean, when the sun's really hot, the top of the sculpture will melt and slow.
Yes.
No, I can't say this. The gentleman that made the sculpture is sitting here in the front row, so I have to be careful what I'm saying. I hope they made it very well. So, and I do believe this is a very strong material. It's the strongest material you can use. It'll get hot, but even the reflective surface sends the heat away, as well as the images it sends away. So I think it's a very permanent material, yeah, in that situation, yeah.
And I just want to add...
It'll be there long after those buildings are dust.
Yes.
The sculpture will still be there.
Yes, of course.
Sorry, modern building has about 35 years of life, that's it.
I just want to add that the positioning of it, that for those of you who have not been at One Bangkok, especially One Bangkok Park, the placement of the sculpture is so dynamic that when you come, you confront it from far away, and as you walk towards it, is hypnotic almost. It's like really pull you towards. It may look little, far away, but as you go closer and closer, it becomes absolutely amazing. And okay, how do you clean it?
Sorry?
How do we clean it?
How do I clean?
Yeah.
I don't clean.
I know you don't, but how do we clean it?
No, just I think the wind and the rain will just enough clean. You shouldn't. These gentlemen, they polished it. I mean, it weighs 35 tons, so it's a very big, substantial
35
thing.
tons, and it's not on the ground level. It's above how many levels?
Four levels. Yeah. I know they had to build something special for it. So I'm glad we caused a little bit of problems for you. Anyway, so no, you don't have to clean it. It'll clean itself. Yeah.
So I think now we are open to some questions for Tony. Please.
Easy questions, please.
Panu, easy questions, please.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tony. I'm Panu.
Pleasure.
I'm art writer in Bangkok. I want to ask two questions. First
No,
question,
one, because we have...
Okay, so one question.
Two.
You mentioned about Joseph Beuys, right? Joseph Beuys, he has his art called social sculpture. He has like political agenda. Did your art have purpose like that?
Sorry?
Has political agenda. Joseph Beuys has political agenda. You can see it from his social sculpture artwork that you're talking about. Like, I want to ask you, you have any agenda, political agenda, or your art has any purpose?
Oh, I thought I covered that in the talk, but okay, if you... Absolutely. Beuys is a very fantastic artist. I think someone I think was admired greatly, but he's the product of a very specific time in Europe, in which, and it impressed me greatly when I first, I'm English, but I went to Germany, and I live in Germany. When I arrived in Germany in the 70s, that obviously after the Second World War, they needed to build a new culture. the icons of the past had failed them. And artists like Beuys, but Beuys is the one you pick out, but there are several of artists of that quality. And similarly in Italy, Mario Merz and Cunellis and other people, they did have, but they worked through the material and it had a political meaning. And I think, as I said, I think that all art is political, you know? And I think that very important agendas, if you like, for me, is what you believe in, you know? Believe in the importance and the relevance of the relationship between our psyche and the material is a theme that I'm really keen on. Also, the idea of not just taking things at superficial value. I'm always very interested in the internal quality of the material and even the structure of the material, because that affects us. What we see on the surface is literally superficial. It's what is underneath the surface. Those are the kind of things. And the way that industrial society, production, is impoverishing the form on this planet, I think, for me, they are very serious political issues.
So I used to ask like very famous artists like Abramovich that art can change the world. She said art cannot change the world. If someone said art can change the world, it's bullshit. What do you think about this? Do you think art can change the world?
You know, we live at a difficult time, you know, because when I'm at home, my wife is crazy about when we have the rubbish, we sort it out, you know? And we put plastic here and paper there and the rest is compost because it's good for the world, you know? But it drives you crazy when there's a war in different parts of the world and every time a bomb goes off, every time there's an explosion, there's more heat and violence and destruction than we can do, we can balance with us sorting the materials. It doesn't mean to say we shouldn't do it. You know, you still have to believe to do it. Because in the end, you're absolutely right. I think the leaders we select in politics have failed us terribly. It doesn't matter who they are. I'm not Trump and Boris Johnson and all of the Erdogan and whoever they are. They fail us constantly and terribly because they're not interested in the well-being of everybody. They're only interested in their own concerns, or their politics make it for a certain group of people. Even religious groups, they have failed us. They've given us models in the past. I'm a materialist. I believe in the sublime complexity of materials. Even the word materiel is from mother, mater. It's from mother, the thing that has brought us, that has borne us and nurtured us. And it's a respect and love for. Do we love one another? No, we do not. Do we love one another? Do we respect one another? Sadly, not enough. You know, and even I'm not a Christian, but I'm born into a Christian society. And even in Islam, I know that one of the creeds of Islam is that you must care for the neighbors next to you, for the next 10 houses. Yeah? What a fantastic idea. Imagine you could care for the nearest 10 families next to you, and they're doing the same. And there would be a fantastic... So you have to forgive me, I'm a child of the 60s where love was in the air. Love, love, love. I still didn't give up on that subject.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
political. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. You mentioned mother and nurture. Thank you. Theme of our Biennale. But you also mentioned politicians. Thank you. Next question, please.
Thank you so much, Ajahn Abhinan and Tony. I'm Ariana. I'm a curator at an international contemporary art museum here. And my question is about your drawing practice, which I know plays a large role in your work. As someone who sees the infinite possibility of material and 10 dimensions, how do you work with 2-dimensional paper to pull something from this 10 dimensions of infinite possibility beyond time into the tip of our iceberg, our world here?
Well, I mean, that's a strange thing about being a human being. Because it doesn't matter what you're doing. Have you ever seen a mathematician at work? He's not just sitting there. He's writing down all the time. He's writing down his formulas. If you ever see a composer composing music, la da dee da 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 la da, and what's he doing? He's vibrating the air. So the one is writing down, the other one is vibrating the air. So he's using material, you know, to actually have. And if, you know, not so many people make sculpture, but I hope we can all still write. So if you're writing things, you write something down. I know what I want to write to you. I'm going to write a message. So I write it down, and then I realize this isn't a good word. So I put a different word in there. Sometimes I change the sentence round, put a different phrase in there. Oh, and that's a nice ending. And sometimes we write sentences which are much stronger than the original thought. This is poesis, Greek, Old Greek, for poetry, for creation. This is when you use the material in front of you to extend yourself into the material, to find things you can't just make up, you know? This is a kind of, if you like, self-generating observation, a dialogue with drawing. And the drawing is just that. I mean, I can sit and think for ages, you know, but sit and think and produce forms concretizes my thoughts and gives me possibilities and whatever. So I think that's really, and it doesn't matter, you can say, well, people don't draw nowadays. They use computers. Oh, computers are, by the way, sadly, also material, you know? And the unfortunate part of computers is that they are industrially formatized. They are already, so what comes out of them is also an industrial format. The beauty of simple materials, like a bit of squashed cellulose in the form of a piece of paper and some graphite in a pencil, is these are very, very primary materials. You can make anything with those things.
Thank you. Please, next question.
Hi, Tony. So you talked about how art, in your opinion, has to make a statement. But what do you think about art, or your art in particular, and its relationship with beauty?
Art and beauty?
Yes.
You mean the aesthetics? Yeah, well, you have to think about what aesthetics means, what it really means. It's a value decision. All aesthetic is, it's just a value decision. Nothing is less or more beautiful. It's relative to the observer. And that's more, even in science, we find out that what plays a role in the reality of our universe and in time and space is the fact that we can observe it. So we go back to the human brain. So aesthetics is simply a question of, when you get up in the morning and you look at yourself in the mirror and you do whatever you do to yourself, and you put the clothes on, you know, and you put your clothes on, and then you sing. So you're presenting yourself to the world. Don't stick your tongue out, because people get a bad idea about that. So, but as soon as the way you are in the world, the way you move, and it's not just the way the face is, it's also, your face is we have a fantastic ability to read faces. You know, when somebody's smiling, you can see in the smile they're not happy, you know? So we can read material with an amazing accuracy. Otherwise, a smile on a painting from 400 years ago wouldn't be relevant still today. So we can read that. But it's not just that. It's also all of what we're doing with our body. I come from Wuppertal, where Pina Bausch, famous dance group, is doing these fantastic things with their bodies and expressing themselves. So aesthetics is really only mean. All it is, after you've got yourself dressed, and you're looking nice, you go for breakfast and you eat what you want to eat, the things you think are good for you. And then the person sitting opposite you at the breakfast table, that's the person you want to spend time with or association with. So what do? You're simply making existential survival decisions about your life, you know? And that is our whole culture, everything we create, in a way, is very, very simple. The purpose of our culture is to keep our naked body from the naked ground. That's everything. So we put some clothes on, and then we sit on furniture in the building, and all of this stuff we're making, this layer of material mitigates between the body and the naked ground. And that's all it is. But to build that up, you're in a constant situation of evaluating those possibilities. This is all aesthetics does. When I was a child, I hated cheese. As an older person, I love cheese, you know? And my children, I offer them cheese, and they tell me, they don't want to know about it. So aesthetics change, you know, how the things look and what they are and whatever they... Aesthetics can just be a sort of trail in history, if you know. So I don't believe in things. I want to know what values come out of my observations and my experiences. I'm not fixed on any particular aesthetical form.
Okay, ground control.
Thank you. Well, I'm an art writer too. I'm an Amata from Ground Control.
What are you?
Amata, my name.
Okay.
So, first of all, when I first see your work at One Bangkok, the first thing I noticed that it's really well made, right? So, I'm thinking about the technological advancements of your work, the uses of
I'm doing that as well.
Yeah? Yeah, sure. So I am thinking about how you talk about computer recently and how the work with the material like cement or the stainless steel that is very recently in our history, like in the industrial age. So the question is the technological advancements is somehow related to the intellectually advancements? Does technical advancements give us the new terms to things or new way of thinking. So, many places here in the world doesn't have that kind of technological advancements, and so, like in the rural area,
Yep.
how could you, think about that place and?
Yeah. Okay, for me it's quite simple. I mean, obviously, I've made a lot of things for many years without using computers. So, and the work I made, which I call early forms, which is about the kind of hybrid forms I make, now young people say to me, so what program do you use, Well, in the 1980s and 90s, the only computer I had sadly was a bit of a slow one, but I mean, so we made it up in the way we make it. But nowadays, there is obviously a possibility to use technology as a tool to make things. What I don't, for myself, I have students that use computers to make sculpture. That's fine. I can't do it because I don't know how to use a computer. I can send emails and a few other things, but I don't know how to do it. But what I can do is all of the work I make is first of all generated by drawing. It was probably generated a long time before computers could do the work. But what I do use, I use computers as a tool to make the work easier, So nowadays, it was not so long ago, it was maybe sort of around 2012 or 13, I made a big column work for somewhere, and the problem is when you put sculpture outside, you need an engineer to tell you exactly how strong and how tall, and you can sit down and then other people see behind you. And and the engineer who does this certificate of construction for me, he called me over and he showed me my sculpture in a computer. And he showed the work when it had a wind of 200 kilometers an hour blowing again. And I thought, oh my God. And I realized immediately, this is going to be the future of making stuff. And so, but the thing is this, I can't make, and I don't want to because I enjoy too much making stuff. But I do we do is I make drawings, small works, sculptures, and when I know it's sure, we scan in, because when you make a sculpture, a form, what is kind of takes a long, long time is to make a form. And in the past, you used a lot of material. silicon form, jelly, something on top of that, and then you put plaster around it and a lot of wood and metal. Oh, it's a lot of material. Nowadays, it's much easier to just scan the material in, and then you have the thing, and then there are ways of printing it up and making the thing. And this has been an enormous advantage, and it's ecologically, I have to say, an enormous advantage of doing that. I can't say it's changed too much my ideas about things, but it's certainly made the making of a work like this much more economic and much easier to make, without a doubt. But I'm waiting for a new generation of sculpture that some of you young people will make using computers, because I haven't seen it yet, I have to say.
Okay. Someone else? Okay.
Hello, I'm Yan Lintet. I'm an engineer, artist, and musician. I heard a lot about intangible things related with geological materials, things of environment. How can you show up how we can express those intangible into tangible things like sculpture ways and art way? Because some art are even changing itself, like kinetic sculpture, some things reflect, and some things that can interact with the user. So can you show up artistic way how you create those inspiration, how you build up much more inspiration and create into new things?
I'm extremely sorry, but quite acoustically, I haven't understood your question. Could you say it a little slower for me?
Oh, okay, yeah. Through your talk, I get a lot about intangible things like feeling, emotion, expression, things of nature, like our cell, the complexity system. We have to deal with those things. How can you get inspiration? How you grow up the inspiration from those intangible things and create new things, new objects? Because some art interact itself like kinetic sculptures, and some interactive sculpture that change itself. So yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you help me?
Intangible.
Yeah. I mean, okay. Not quite. I'll try and answer, but I'm not quite sure I've understood the question. But I mean, I've had a particularly charmed life. You know, I mean, I've had a lot of privilege. I actually come from a family with no wealth, but I've been very, very fortunate in the way I've had a very good education in Britain, and the greatest privilege I've had. I've spent my entire adult life in my studio, just standing in front of things. Don't go fast, things go slow. It's a lot of working processes, some techniques I have to learn, but I've had a long time to put the parts of my ideas and my work together. And that's really how I see my work. I've been given this enormous opportunity to do a job not just for myself, but for everybody. So when I'm in the studio, I think I'm working not just for myself, but just to find new meaningful forms. And I can't tell you there's a recipe for that. I don't know how that works. It's maybe part of the mystery of my own, because I don't know how it works. I don't know why and how I come to some decisions that others would never arrive at. It's my own crazy mixed up personality or whatever it is. But it's not, maybe sometimes I know the work can have a kind of a spectacular feeling about it, but the working process isn't spectacular. It's just tenacious, sticking to the job, trying to develop. That's why I don't think too much about where things will end up or what people will think about. I don't want to know about all those things. I'm a million miles away from installations. It's the last thing I want to think about. All I have is I just have an obligation. I have certain themes I started on maybe 50 years ago. I just want to develop those themes and to keep working on that. There's no recipe.
Okay, thank you. One last question, please. Oh, 3 last questions.
Hey. My jet lag's beginning to develop in the air above me.
Thank you so much for your inspiring talk today, and
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to this session. And I have watched your interview at Castle Howard early this year, and you were talking about the essence of art. And I would like you to elaborate more on, from your point of view, what is the essence of art?
Ooh, did I talk about? I sometimes say things that I regret. You know? Okay, the essence of art. I'm not sure the essence of it, but I mean, I think the essence of it is to do a job that other people don't do. You know, we're not working in industry. We're not making industrial objects. We're looking into the world that does not exist. We're trying to find new forms, new meaningful forms. Some of it won't be meaningful, but some of it will. You know, and this is the great thing. You know, when you look at really fundamental great artworks, you're looking at Leonardo da Vinci, or you're looking at Van Gogh. What is the essence of their work? Is that they produced images and things that located human beings where we are. They said exactly, they instinctively showed exactly where we are and who we are. They reveal part to ourselves. It's a look in a mirror that expresses something of ourselves. And I think in a lot of great art, whether it's Nold or Picasso and all these other artists, that's all they really do, is that they actually express things. They're prepared to spend the time and find a form that expresses humanity. And that's the essence of art. We can't, that's why machine art isn't relevant, or AI or whatever, you know. It's not humanity. All we can do is reflect on the concerns and the needs of humanity.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you. We already have the last 2 person that asked the question.
Okay.
So one คุณคิมหรือเปล่า
Hi, Mr. Craig. You spoke briefly about how it is the material that activates the audience. Do you ever consider yourself as material that activates your own work?
Absolutely. No, I mean any of us. We can't. We have this wonderful idea that we're all self-expressing individuals, but all we're just the consequence of a very, very long history of this universe, in a way. You know, there's a fantastic description I read recently of our planet, which has existed in some state for about 5 billion years. For 2 billion years, it was just too hot for anything to exist, but after 2 billion years, there was already life on the planet. But just just viruses and whatever, and bacteria materials. And then something quite amazing happened, is that 2 very different kinds of bacteria actually came into a synthesis. And from this one instance, all of plants or animals, the whole of life came from that moment. So it's a radial experience. So, and all we are is the end of this experience. And as I said, I mean, the development of material from atomic, mineral, complicated atoms, to organic atoms, molecules, to thinking atoms, to self-reflective, is an enormous step up. So I see it in a very simple way. And the human being, and the figure has always been there. I mean, it's a different thing, because in the 19th century, as I said, I started by saying the figure was the only thing we were occupied with up to the 19th century. And a lot of artists have used the figure, and in early works, there's a lot of early work where I actually am an element in that thing, and that's how I see it today. Of course, everything that comes out of through my hands and through my brain is I can't see it any other way. Sorry, I'm not sure I answered that question. One more question, and I think I've done. What was that?
That's the last question. Last question, please. Last question. Yes, please. Gentleman in white. T-shirt. Yeah. เชิญครับ เชิญ
Hi. I have a question about if your last piece that's located at One Bangkok talk to you, what that sculpture talk to you about what?
Well, this is getting very surreal now, isn't it? You mean the piggy fan answers back? No. I mean, as I said, I started that work 10 years ago. And it's this final thing, is really the ultimate consequence. The size and the material is the kind of ultimate, that's why I think I'm very happy with it myself. Just because it's a kind of a very long development that's actually crystallized into something which I really feel very happy with. So I can't quite follow your thing because, as I said, I'm in a dialogue with the material all the time. The first thing, it was a drawing. That talked to me. The next thing was the small models I made. I was in dialogue with them. So the whole thing is kind of a kind of integral experience with the material. But one thing I could say, because the question's not uninteresting, people think that art is based on ideas or inspiration and blah, blah, blah. A lot of art, once an artist starts his work, I think a great deal of the input for the next work is the work I've just finished. So immediately that's finished, already, I can say this quite honestly, last night I couldn't sleep, jet lag, and I was seriously thinking about how things go on from that point, but that's the problem of being an artist. If you're an artist, and maybe if you're any job you're doing, and you're obsessive about it, it'll keep you awake day and night until you keep producing and keep making, and that's the essence of a creative life, really. That's all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you, Tony and Dr. Apinan, for this fascinating conversation. We truly appreciate your time and insights that you have shared with us today. I think now is a
Okay.
photo session.
Please can I invite Kun Thapana, CEO and founder of the Bangkok Art and Foundation.
No, come together.
Kun Pui Stefan, Kun Pum, and Ajahn Sansern, please.
Okay. Before we wrap up today, I would like to remind everyone that Tony Cragg's remarkable work is featured as part of Bangkok Art Biennale 2024 and will be permanently installed at One Bangkok, which will be open to public officially on the 25th of October. So please make sure to go see it and experience it with your own eyes. And I think that's it. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the session and we are looking forward to see you for the rest of our Biennale. Please stay tuned for our upcoming events. As for today, have a wonderful evening. สวัสดีค่ะ